Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's Science at Melbourne public lecture. My name is Professor Moira O'Brien, and I have the pleasure and privilege of being the Dean of Science here at the University of Melbourne. I will begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land we are on this evening, the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people. And I also acknowledge the traditional owners and First Nations peoples of the lands on which our online audience is joining us tonight. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are this country's first scientists with deep and enduring knowledge of the lands, waters and skies. And I pay my respects to elders, past and present, and I welcome all First Nations people joining us here this evening. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the third of 4 events in the Science at Melbourne Lecture series for this year. These presentations are just one way that the Faculty of Science reaches out to share our knowledge and love of science of all types with the wider community. We aim to demonstrate the breadth and depth and impact of our research and to involve you in our conversations about some of the most pressing scientific and social issues of our time. Now, I'll quickly whip through some of the housekeeping details so we can actually focus on the main discussion. We are recording this lecture and will subsequently make the recording available on the Faculty of Science website. We will also email the link to everyone who has registered. Tonight's lecture is also the kick-off of the University's 2025 Science Festival, and this is one of the biggest weeks of the year. This is now in its 11th year, and the University's annual Science Festival showcases STEM research, innovation and impact in free experiences for students, staff and the public and across National Science Week. Visit the festival website to register for rare opportunities to tour some of our state-of-the-art labs and unique museum collections, or to participate in expert-led interactive masterclasses. The Science Festival is always fascinating and it's fun, so please share it with your friends and families. After the festival, we will be hosting one more Science at Melbourne lecture, which will be on the 8th of October. I encourage you to sign up to our mailing list to learn more about the opportunities to engage with our research, and I believe you can sign up. There'll be staff after the event if you haven't done it already. And I encourage everyone who's joining us here in person to stay afterwards for some refreshments and some informal chats with the speakers, colleagues, members of the public after the lecture. Intriguingly, tonight's discussion is titled How to Think Like a Spy, the Science of Intelligence. Now, Hollywood presents this as a glamorous version of spying in movie franchises like James Bond, Mission Impossible, or the Bourne Identity series. Now, looking at our expert panel, they are a little bit glamorous. Now, I can't confirm if they can drive an Aston Martin or whether they regularly drink Vespa martinis, but they could. They may want to clarify. But I can tell you that if I owned a casino, I would not let them in, because I am sure they are all capable of counting cards and of rapidly adapting and calculating changes in the odds or devising devilish strategies to beat the house. Now, putting these fanciful stereotypes aside, I suspect that the reality of intelligence gathering and analysis is simultaneously less glamorous and far more complex than any James Bond mission. Intelligence technologies are increasingly encroaching on the lives of ordinary citizens, raising dilemmas about safety, privacy and freedom. And we are living through an era of great uncertainty and geopolitical upheaval, with growing conflict, evolving criminal and terrorist threats, looming environmental crises, and evolving pandemics affecting humans, animals, and usually both. How can we ethically monitor these interconnected threats to make the best possible predictions and decisions for our responses? I can't wait to hear from the panellists about their thoughts, many of whom have actually lived through real scenarios rather than just the theoretical. Our moderator will introduce our panel in greater detail shortly, so instead I focus on her. Dr. Suelette Dreyfus lectures on information security and privacy in the Faculty of Engineering and Information Technology here at the University of Melbourne. She completed her bachelor degree at Columbia University in New York and her doctorate at Monash University. Her research spans cybersecurity, whistleblowing, privacy and anonymity technologies and policies, including information systems in hospitals and practices in journalism. As well as advising on several parliamentary committees, Suelette has co-authored multiple international reports and papers in this area. She is a director on the National Board of the Australian Information Securities Association, which is a not-for-profit organisation with a membership of more than 14,000 professionals. Clearly, we are in very safe hands with Suelette. So with much anticipation, I hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor O'Brien, for such a lovely introduction. And now I'm looking forward to introducing our panelists. Before I do that, I just want to mention that I think we have a Slido up for people who might want to submit questions electronically, but we will also have a microphone to pass around at the end for people who want to actually ask questions the old-fashioned way, just talking into the microphone. And then, of course, if you stay for refreshments afterwards and want to have a chance to chat with our panelists, you can also see the Science Gallery's exhibition Distraction, which is available this evening. So let me come on and introduce our panelists for the evening and begin the discussion, and then encourage you all to enter the discussion with questions after we've had a chance to hear from our panelists initially. Dr. Chris Baker is a Senior Research Fellow at the School of Mathematics and Statistics here at the University of Melbourne. Chris specializes in mathematical modeling to support decision-making in biosecurity, ecology, and epidemiology, and that's helping to protect ecosystems and fight disease. Their work spans species reintroductions, invasive species, and infectious disease control in animals and in humans. By turning limited data into actionable insights, Chris supports evidence-based decisions to improve conservation and strengthen Australia's preparedness for emerging biological threats. Excuse me for my slightly croaky voice tonight. Hayley Van Loon is an intelligence and national security professional, currently serving as Deputy CEO of Crime Stoppers International and a founder of Magnolia Intelligence, a Melbourne-based security intelligence consultancy. She has nearly 20 years of experience advising governments, corporates, and global organizations on counterterrorism, insider threat, organized crime, and digital safety. That includes 10 years in the United States, working on the intersection of security, technology, and strategy. Hayley came back to Australia in 2023 with a renewed focus on sovereign capability and public impact, and she sits on several international coalitions and advisory boards. And finally, we have Dr. Ariel Kruger. Ari is his code name. And Ari is a senior fellow, research fellow and trainer at the Hunt Lab here at the University of Melbourne, working at the intersection of social science, science, and epistemology. He specializes in intelligence analysis, analytical writing, argument mapping, forecasting, and expert elicitation, and has trained and has delivered training to government agencies across Australia and internationally. Ariel's academic research focuses on developing new methods to detect misinformation, a problem I'm sure we've all come across with these days, and improving analytic techniques to better anticipate future events. Welcome to the panel. Now, can I just say, I agree with Professor O'Brien that when I think about spies and what they do, I kind of have a vision, and this is what I was thinking, particularly you, Hayley, because you've worked practically in the field and been in Canberra. I had in my mind this image of, kind of Charlie's Angel-esque, Hayley abseiling down Mount Kosciuszko, leaping on skis to chase the bad guys in the snow while the theme song from Mission Impossible plays in the background. Was that your typical day working in Canberra?
Well, I would say no, that's not what Canberra is like. Also, the last time I was in the snow, I broke my leg and now I have a bionic leg. So I'm definitely not doing that in the snow, but there is a lot of report writing that goes on. Yes.
Right, okay. So that's not an average day if someone wants to take a job in camera and intelligence. Excellent.
No.
So I think actually you've just introduced us to our first topic, which is structured reasoning and intelligence thinking. And I might start with you, Ari, if you can talk to us a little bit about what does it mean to think like a spy, and how does intelligence analysis differ from regular problem solving or research in a field?
Yeah, thanks, and thank you for the introduction. I can't count cards, but I could probably drink my weight in martinis. So to sum it up, I think reasoning and intelligence analysis is disciplined reasoning under uncertainty, under conditions of uncertainty. And the problem solving in that domain differs quite a lot from, let's contrast it with science, since this is a science lecture. I think first, one of the major differences is how truth emerges from the process. In science, you've got a hypothesis, you design an experiment, and you get results that kind of point one way or the other. But in intelligence analysis, you don't really have a lab to test your hypotheses. And the truth is often obscured by things like geopolitical fog or changes in politics, or it may even remain above your classification level, your clearance level, rather. Then I think another difference is in the role of judgment, the role that judgment plays. In science, your judgments, I suppose, are constrained by your methods and your data. But in intelligence analysis, your data is often not very definitive. So the role of the judgment of the analyst is really front and center in the whole process. And finally, I think the natures of the problems themselves are going to be very different between science and intelligence analysis. In science, you probably want a question that's very narrowly defined, so you can isolate causes and control for variables. But in intelligence analysis, your problems are very messy, very dynamic, and very difficult. So they demand a different kind of approach to solving them.
So Chris, I'm wondering if you can talk to us a little bit about assessing biological risk. Because the humans can't tell you what's going on, and you can't read a set of public postings on social media.
Oh, absolutely. And thanks for having me today. It's really lovely to be here. And it's funny you mentioned Mount Kosciuszko, because I have been abseiling at Mount Kosciuszko, but not as part of my job. But yeah, absolutely. What we do in my work is quite different to what I think we see a lot of mathematicians doing and other people in science. I don't know if you were reading my notes, but I was about to mention hypothesis testing as well as one of the sort of key differences that we do in managing biological threats. Because we don't run experiments, we just have to observe what happens and then do our best to understand as much as we can and really focus in on what decisions need to be made and how do we provide evidence such that we can have the best confidence in what we're going to do next, as opposed to necessarily fully understanding exactly what's happening.
So Haley, you used to work on a course in the US called How to Think Like a Spy. And what were the most important things you taught in that?
Well, I think it's very important to kind of note that the methods of intelligence analysis and how do you think like a spy is obviously translatable to business and companies and return on investment. So we have to look at how can we enable leaders in both the public and private sector to make decisions quickly with limited data. And that's exactly what intelligence analysis or intelligence thinking is. We're often given a lot of information and we have to make time-critical decisions. We can't wait to gather all the research to get all the facts. We're not dealing in facts, we're dealing in information, and we don't know how credible it is, we don't know what the intent might be, or we don't know, obviously, if the individual is even a threat. Do they have capability as well? And so when we translate that over to the private sector and other public sector functions like biosecurity, exactly what both you and Ari have said, is that we're dealing in ambiguity and we have to be able to use some of our own judgment based on our understanding and learning in the past to make clear and concise recommendations to leadership around the best way to move forward with the limited negative impact for either the animals, the community or people.
So this seems to be a recurring theme about incomplete and messy data, and how you evaluate and balance uncertainty in that environment. Ari, in particular, are there structured reasoning tools that you use? And also, I mean, forecasting is a bit of a crystal ball anyway, but even more so when you're not necessarily dealing with facts, but as you say, with information. How do you go about dealing with that double level of uncertainty?
I think the key here would be to make sure that you are calibrated. So it's not really enough just to make the judgments. You have to keep track of how accurate your judgments are over time. So when you make a judgment, you also probably ascribe a level of confidence to it. So you also need to check about whether that level of confidence actually aligns with reality over time. If you say some event is 70% likely to happen, that really means you're saying when you make that call 7 out of 10 times, you're going to be right. If it turns out that you're only right 4 out of the 10 times, you're overconfident. But if you're right 9 out of the 10 times, you're underconfident. So you really need to keep track of that and have a very strong internal gauge of how your confidence tracks, reality.
So in terms, Haley, of actually being able to balance the timeliness and accuracy, is there something there where you decide, I will just forego the accuracy to get the timeliness? And really, do people feel comfortable in intelligence settings making decisions on things that are going to be less than 5 out of 10?
Well, actually, hearing Ari say that, I thought, oh gosh, I don't ever deal in percentages. Like I'm not a mathematician and don't apply percentages to anything. And I look down here and I'm like, Dr. Haley. Okay, so my answer is actually more like, finger in the air, understanding my threat environment and knowing what the potential outcome is if I do not make a decision and how quickly I have to make it. So if it's threat to life, I'm more willing to make a call that is wrong but still protects life than withhold making a call. So do we know what the likelihood of this event occurring is? Do we know what the capability of the threat actor is? And do we know that their intent is actually to carry it out? So, if you have limited information, say you've got one piece of human source information that says that there is going to be a bomb go off in Bourke Street Mall at 12 o'clock and it's 11:30, I'm pretty confident that I'm happy to make a call to evacuate Bourke Street Mall rather than wait and see, wait for complete information. If it's something where making that decision could impact an ongoing long-term issue where more people could be impacted, we have to measure what enables the best protection of the most amount of lives. And so when you think of people that work in the space that I've worked in, you are having to make very independent, decisions based on limited information, based on your understanding of the threat environment. And that's where your experience and time on the ground and our training comes into play. So I can't give you percentages because that's not, where my headspace is at. But if I say to you, I think it's a really bad idea for you to, host this event at this place because, we've seen an uptick in extremist rhetoric online and they're targeting XYZ. People say, but what's the actual chance, Haley, of them actually doing that? I go, I don't care. My point is that this is a risk, and if you're willing to take that risk, well, I'm sorry, my advice is not to do it. And that is a challenge in our space because we're almost like an insurance policy, and you often won't see that we've worked, that your insurance policy has worked because we've prevented something. So it can be a really difficult thing to put metrics on.
I mean, in Zero Dark 30, they were always giving percentages. So I just
that's military intelligence.
Yeah, right. Okay.
But sorry, I'll just pick up on that. Haley, do you use words like likely, unlikely? Yeah. So I think those words of estimate of probability do correspond to perhaps ranges or percentages.
Yeah. Chris, can you discuss this in regard to disease origin and spread modeling? I mean, how do you do it with limited, incomplete data when the data is messy, and especially when the risk is so high? It might not be loss of life, although it could be, but, a damage to the environment that can't be taken back again, the introduction of foxes to Australia. The impact of that is obviously potentially forever.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we've been hearing this conversation, one of the words that comes to my mind that we use to describe this sort of situation in my area is partially observable. So we don't fully understand what's going on, but there is some data coming out. And as mathematicians, one of the things we do is try and create sort of an underlying model of how we think a system is working. So we can describe dynamics, even if we can't fully see them. And we can also describe what sort of information you might be seeing if something was happening. So that using that sort of framework, we can start to uncover what might be happening underneath. But so when we come to uncertainty as well, there's kind of two aspects of it. One is, what is the accuracy of what is happening and how well are we understanding that? But there's also the questions about how are we dealing with it. So in biosecurity, we are really thinking about, well, what are the decisions that need to be made? And even if there's underlying uncertainty, we can then say, well, even if we're not sure if we're in situation A or situation B, how does decision 1 or decision 2 look in each of these different scenarios? And if decision 1 is better in both of them, then you can go forward with confidence about what's happening. But if sort of the uncertainty of the underlying situation means that you've got a difference in which decision is better, that points to more work that needs to be done.
So can I ask a kind of a hard question here, which is that when one is in academia, you can do very extended research and quite sophisticated models. In the fullness of time, does decision-making based on them, is it actually better? I mean, it's a hard question, right? But a legitimate one. Is it actually, do we have evidence that it's actually better? Does it make a difference?
Well, what we're really trying to do is provide the most evidence that we can to the people who need to make the decisions. As to what decision they would make if they didn't have that evidence, I'm not sure. Maybe someone should do that study. It's really good.
But decision quality, I think, measuring decision quality is a really, really difficult problem. I've done a little bit of research about whether or not structured analytic techniques make a difference to the quality of decisions. And the best we could kind of do was seeing is if the decision aligned with the recommendation of the analysis. If it did, then you can say that, well, on that dimension at least, it was a good decision. But yeah, it's a really difficult, intractable problem to try and measure whether or not a decision has been improved by anything.
I mean, sort of related to that is a question I've got, I think, really for you, Haley, which is that, can you actually teach someone good judgment?
I've got to remind myself I'm sitting in, a science area. I like to make jokes about engineers usually at this point in time, but
That's okay. They're another faculty.
yes, I think you can. Not everyone, though. There are certainly methodologies, and Ari's mentioned some of them around, ways to make, develop good judgment. So if you don't know, you can use structured analytic techniques. You can do all sorts of exercises that enable either yourself or a group to come to a kind of more, thought about, well-rounded decision or suggestion. But there are some things that, during a recruitment process for roles like intelligence that you're recruiting for, and judgment, being able to read a room, emotional intelligence, your EQ is highly important in the judgment phase of that. So some people are really good at making judgments, but they need time and they need space and they need data and they need those to make that judgment call. But when you've got 5 seconds to make that judgment call, there is a certain type of person that can inherently do that, but there is training that can enhance that, of course.
But presumably the intelligence community is large enough to be able to draw on those two different skill sets, depending on what environment they need.
Yeah, I think it depends on, and most of you would know that our intelligence community here in Australia is divided up into collection or analysis agencies, except for ASIO, which is both a collection and analysis. And so you are recruiting into different streams for very different things. When I'm talking about human intelligence collection, methodology and analysis, which requires all those on-the-ground judgment calls, that emotional intelligence, that ability to connect with people, to understand motivation, based on one conversation with a person. So, when you walk into a room, everyone's made their assessment of you in the first 30 seconds, and then depending on how they feel, if they decided they didn't like you, you spend the rest of the interaction basically trying to make them like you, which is an incredibly difficult thing to do because they're thinking everything to back up their initial assessment. And so that goes into your judgment, right? So how you are able to make people want to talk to you, make people like you in the first 30 seconds of an interaction, which is an incredibly hard thing to do. So, there are so many kind of things we could talk about in this space, but I think you can teach judgment, but, there are some things that inherently are just suited to some personality types and brain chemistry and things.
I mean, I've seen through the cybersecurity space how important human factors are. And in cybersecurity, people sometimes, engineers sometimes don't take that side of things as seriously. But in fact, human factors underlie probably the highest number of most common attacks in internet-based attacks on people's cybersecurity. So I'm interested in human factors, and particularly, I think, Ari, you had some thoughts on bias and the importance of bias and correcting for bias.
Yeah, so cognitive biases is what we're talking about. And there are certainly methods you can do to kind of mitigate or try to mitigate their effects, but there's no real foolproof method of completely de-biasing. Being aware of them, being aware of the biases and how they operate in your context is a good start. But there are some big, I guess, cognitive biases that enter the picture with intelligence analysis. Confirmation bias is a big one. And that's when you search for confirming evidence rather than falsifying evidence, which is, if you search for things that confirm your hypothesis, you're pretty much always going to find them. And the other one is the mirror imaging bias, which I think is pretty pernicious in the space. And that's when you think that your adversary thinks like you do, is a rational actor just like you are, when in fact that's so often not the case. And I think that can lead people down the wrong path as well. So those are sort of two major ones. You can use structured analytic techniques to kind of avoid falling into these traps, but there hasn't been a ton of research onto whether or not they actually do the job they're supposed to.
So can you think of any practical examples or a scenario where you would use?
Yeah, so like time constraints, right, are a major one in intelligence analysis. So what you want to do is you want to craft your report in such a way that the decision maker only has to look at 3 or 4 sentences to get the entire gist of the argument that you're trying to make. And there are analytic techniques like argument mapping that can really help with drafting and structuring those reports.
Mm-hmm. So, Chris, do you find that human factors are also an issue in your area, especially in terms of biosecurity? And even if they're not deliberate threats, accidental threats, is there technology that can mitigate it?
Yeah, human behaviour plays a huge part in biosecurity, and a lot of movements, of whether it's pests, diseases, animals around Australia, or human mediated. One of the ways it comes out is through analysing, and as I said before, we've got this sort of partially observable system, and we can try and characterise what's happening underneath. And colleagues and I analysing the disease spread in 2001 in the UK. We've been looking at finding that we can characterise a lot of the early part of some of the outbreaks really, really quite well. But then there's these long tails, that we call them, where the models that we predict, given the observations that we see, say that the outbreak should be dying out faster than they should. And what it turns out is that there was some sort of, say, illegal or unnotified movements of animals happening, which kept the disease going longer than it should. So this is where these tools coming through partially observable models can then indicate to say, well, the system's actually changed here, and there's something else going on beyond the disease spread that we've been seeing so far.
So that's where you might have a sick herd with a contagious disease, and you don't want them to move because they'd take the disease with them. Yeah,
exactly. So one of the main strategies that we have to control disease in animal and livestock populations is to just shut down movement. So it's called a declared area. We might say within 5 kilometres or within the whole state, depending on the situation, no animals are to be moved, or you can't move machinery between properties without permits and so on.
And how impactful do you think it is in terms of people accidentally bringing things into the country, the information that's provided when you come back into Australia after an overseas trip, for example? Do you think that has much of an impact, or is it as successful as one would hope to not bring pests in?
Well, it is one of the way pests and diseases or other weeds can get into Australia and other regions, but it is only one of many ways. So it's a very prominent one that we see on TV with Border Force and other types of shows. We also have a lot of cargo coming to Australia, so sea containers, and one of the things that one of the pests we've worked on is giant African snails, which are, as the name might give away, they're giant snails that can...
Okay.
In ecology, we sometimes have very descriptive names. But they can actually attach to the side of a container ship and survive for quite a long time and spread once they get here. And one of the things that the Department of Agriculture and Fisheries and Forestry do is set up sort of detection surveillance sites around ports to catch insects and look for other bugs that might be coming through one of the many pathways into Australia.
And tell me why the giant snails are so bad, just for those of us who aren't an expert in giant snails.
Well, I'm not an expert in giant snails, I'm an expert in mathematics. We model, I would say, probably hundreds of different pests and diseases across the different projects that we work on. But one of the worst things I've heard about the giant African snails is my team tells me they can eat concrete, so that sounds quite worrying.
Ooh, okay. So I have to think about that one for a minute. So Hayley, human factors, can they both be a strength and a weakness? And how important is persuasion?
Well, one of the things I speak to a lot of critical infrastructure providers because obviously it's a big kind of security risk for Australia. And one of the first things I say is your people are your biggest asset and your biggest problem, because you can have the best cybersecurity, you can have the best firewalls, bots, best team, and it doesn't matter if people can circumnavigate your guns, guards and gates and get into your building, or if they're already there from an insider threat perspective. People change over their lifetime. So somebody might be recruited, go through an HR process, have a police check, all those things, and they seem like they're okay, they're good to go, they're fine to work in the control room that controls the power to the whole of the state of Victoria. And then something might change in their life, like they become addicted to gambling, or divorce that causes them significant personal distress, which makes them more likely to be susceptible to recruitment from foreign intelligence services. Or, people have different things to lean into, and we need to continually assess people inside our critical infrastructure and our organisations, including universities, to determine if they're a threat to our national security and our way of life. So they are a good security culture, which is where your people are an asset. So I say, in Australia, it's a really funny thing where you walk down a hallway in a building and everyone looks down instead of talking to each other for some reason. Whereas in the States, like most places, are like, hi, how are you? Haven't met you before. Where are you from? And we really need to change the way we interact with one another to make us more of an asset to our community and our national resilience. Because if you're walking down the hallway, and me personally, I've done lots of physical penetration tests of critical infrastructure sites in the US. And everyone's like, how do you do it? Do you abseil over the fence? Do you get under the lasers? And clearly I do not. I'm a mother of 3 children and I no longer am nimble. But no, I walk in the front door using social engineering techniques. I will follow the people to the local Starbucks where they have their, pass hanging off their belt, and I'll copy that standing next to them. I'll create a pass, I'll get myself in there, and I'll go all the way to the control room and inertly turn off the power. So meanwhile, the guys in their hoodies, the hackers, are there doing their thing for hours trying to get someone to click on a phishing email, which is another vulnerability of people. But you can do all that, and I've just walked straight in. But if you have people in the hallways saying, hi, I haven't met you before, haven't seen you before, what area do you work in? Oh, can I help you? We need to learn to talk to each other more to protect ourselves better and become greater assets, because we are also the greatest risk.
I had a conversation with a professional pen tester who showed me a photo of that he'd used as his fake ID card for a company that he'd penetrated. And it was there on his thing. It had all the proper name and everything, but the photo was of a Lego man. And he just breezed right in and wandered around the company as though Lego men were employed.
And this is why security awareness, training is so important.
But I mean, obviously you can try and pick up flaws in security through analytics of data because there become anomalies and irregularities. But with that becomes a kind of increase in surveillance, and does that change the timbre of our society? So one of the questions I think that the security space opens today with the advent of enormous data gathering and immense power in the ability to analyze that data is the trade-off between an open society and a more secret society. And is that a less accountable society? And that's particularly hard in an academic environment, which is an open, transparent, and communicative environment. So I would ask Ari a little bit about open research for intelligence training versus operational limits. Can you talk a little bit about that, please?
Sure. So the Hunt Lab does, intelligence development training, professional development training for a range of agencies. And ideally what you want to do with those is you want to use the products or the reports that actually are generated by the organization themselves. But for obvious reasons, that's next to impossible. So you're left with kind of two choices. And the first is you can use declassified material. And that has its place in the training system, but it's often really out of date because it takes a long time for things to become declassified, so they're no longer as relevant as they perhaps once were. The other thing that you can do, which we do at the lab, is you develop fictionalized or completely fictional scenarios that have sort of an intelligence element. And that way you don't need access to anything secret or confidential, and you can still teach those underlying reasoning techniques that are common to all kinds of intelligence analysis, whether it was 50 years ago or now.
Chris, can you talk a little bit about the legal and privacy limits in public health and trade-sensitive outbreaks as well?
Yeah, so privacy is a really big issue in biosecurity and biosecurity management. And then, I don't know if people have been reading the news around the avian influenza outbreaks that we've had in the last year or two, but the sort of the impacts on farm are really, really terrible. And you can go back and read the news about how many hundreds of thousands of chickens were killed just to control the outbreak. And so, yeah, there's a lot of sensitivity around which properties have disease, because that's going to it's going to worry everyone's neighbours and everything like that. So you can't really publish things like this, or you have to be very, very careful. So we really do see a difference in what information needs to be, revealed for different people. So the people in state government, in the state control centre, who are working on managing the disease and trying to control the outbreak, need to know everything they can. But also the public needs to be kept aware of what's going on in some reasonable way. And so what some of our colleagues work, the way we sort of work around this with the Australian Research Data Commons, is trying to have different levels of information and trying to guarantee certain, compliance with how good that information is. Because you need to be able to trust someone's information, even if you can't actually directly see everything that's going on.
Is that also some de-identified information to be able to extract value and draw conclusions without knowing it's Fred's farm or whatever that was infected?
Yeah, exactly. So within Australia, we can talk about like LGA level data instead of in individual premises or that sort of thing. Yeah.
Do you think that it's and this is very much, I think, a statistical question, but do you see a problem with the growth in computing power, analysis power, both speed and power, AI, et cetera, with being able to analyze data and the ability to re-identify de-identified data, thereby not being able to provide the same level of open de-identified data for researchers to use across the country?
Yeah, that's a good question. I guess a point could be if there's only one chicken farm in a local government area and you're talking about how many cases in that area, it's going to be pretty obvious. But yeah, it's potentially a case-by-case thing where we might need to have groups of people who are kind of checking what's going on and what information is being released to maintain a balance of like public scrutiny of what's happening, but also privacy of the individuals who are affected by it.
I mean, it seems like the de-identification, re-identification of data is almost a whole stream of study in itself, in being able to analyze that. In terms of openness and secrecy, Haley, I'm interested in preventing silos of information, but obviously intelligence builds in silos of information from security. So how do you actually balance that in an intelligence organization?
Well, I think some time ago we moved from the need to know to the need to share methodology. So whenever you have intelligence, you always look to how and who and where can I share this to create positive impact. So it really comes down to, obviously, always the protection of the source comes first, whether that be human or other. But then second, how can we get this information declassified or to a lower level so that it can be shared more broadly for better protection for the community. And you see that across the board where we've seen integration between our different law enforcement agencies and our intelligence services in your joint counterterrorism teams. You see this across the board in collaboration globally at Interpol, World Economic Forums, all the United Nations, all these places where as long as we are doing our best to protect the individuals where the information has come from under any circumstances, really, we need to look at how we share it. The thing is that criminal elements, whether they be, or threat actors, I should say, because we're dealing not only with criminals, but also terrorist organisations, which arguably are criminals, but also foreign intelligence services. We need to work out what is the biggest impact with the lowest kind of damage, I guess, to our streams of information. Yeah.
In cybersecurity, one of the things that I've been looking at and I find very interesting is the idea that poorly designed cybersecurity really reduces the adoption of cybersecurity tools and makes our whole ecosystem less secure. So I'm very interested in what the panel thinks about the importance of design in trying to bring the humans along for the journey when you've got a set of decisions to be made from data, when you're analyzing the data, et cetera. Ari, do you have thoughts on adoption and barriers to adoption of tech in this space?
Yeah, sure. So back in 2018, I was part of what was called the Swarm Project, which was a project funded out of the US intelligence community. And we were tasked with building a collaborative reasoning platform, a crowdsourced reasoning platform. And designing that was really challenging because there are a couple of major barriers to getting tech adopted within the intelligence community. There's a lot of technical ones, which I probably won't go into here, but I think the major ones is that whatever you design, the analyst has to want to use it. They have to actually, want to actually get their hands dirty with the tool. And this needed to be a guiding principle for the design of the platform. We were, I guess, moderately successful. It was never quite implemented within the IC. But yeah, we found that what you really needed to do is give analysts the latitude to kind of think how they want to with the tool, while also kind of structuring their thinking in such a way that you're going to get better results. So yeah, I think the major thing is that you need to design something that the analyst wants to use.
That means you have to, in a sense, track and map their thought and workflows in order to adapt the technology to it.
Yeah, that's right. I think, like a lot of areas, analysts, their methods and the techniques that they use become pretty entrenched. And this is probably because of the high pressure, the high stakes of the job. You might find that analysts revert to things like mental heuristics or habits. So when a new tool might come along that seems like a disruption, you're going to have a really hard time getting them to shift away from how they normally do things. So yeah.
Because they're worried potentially about not being able to do their job as well or getting an output.
As well, but also on time. If it takes more time and effort to use the tool and you're getting similar results, then there's no way they're going to use it.
Yeah, so that actually is the question I was going to put to you, Haley. In terms of available tools and technologies, some can become overcomplicated. Can you teach old spies new tricks?
Might have to ask my family that one. Look, I actually was talking to somebody about this today in relation to open source intelligence tools. There's a lot of platforms out there at the moment that help you scrape kind of open source intelligence data from publicly available sources of information. And the issue there can be that whilst they're great because it's like one place to get everything instead of logging into a lot of places, you'll often find people like myself reverting back to just Googling things because we're so used to that process, and lots of these different government departments, outside the IC, lots of private industry as well, adopt these tools, and then by the time you learn how to use it to its best capability, they're procuring a new one. And so, so it's like, okay, well, we just learned how to use that one to its, the best we could use it. And now we're moving on to a new one. So let's just go back and do what we were originally doing. I think one of the biggest issues is that when you're dealing, I think you kind of said it, Ari, it's like we're dealing with things quickly and we don't have time to stuff about. Sorry, that's not very eloquent of me, but we don't. We just need to get on with the job. And if things are going to be an impediment to speed, and there's people in my family that often say to me, Hayley, people don't move at the pace with which you want them to move at. But that comes from where my early career started. And so if these tools are an impediment to speed, to responding to things, to getting an answer, to providing advice, then they're not helpful at all, unless they're really giving us something very different.
I mean, I think it's fair to say that most of us suffer from some form of platform exhaustion, right? We're just kind of overwhelmed with all the platforms we have to log into in order to do the simplest of things. I'm quite interested in the crossover point between biosecurity and intelligence. Chris, you obviously work in biosecurity modeling. Can you walk us through how you might distinguish between a natural disease outbreak and a deliberate act, and what tools you might use to separate them?
Yeah, so the way that we distinguish, or we sort of think about it, is the biological process, or is it some human-mediated spread that we're not aware of and we don't know what the source is? And I think I'll just go back to partial observable again, because within the underlying models that we can create for this, we can have parameters which describe spread between premises as sort of a distance function, that you would expect more spread closer between two different premises than less further away. It can be driven by wildlife. So a lot of diseases can be spread by, say, mosquitoes or other biting insects, and we can characterize populations of those and how much spread you might expect. And we can also put in sort of a background movement rate, which is just essentially some random spread that isn't characterized by any biological mechanism that we know of or that we would expect for a particular disease. And so by looking at what we observe, we can then try and estimate what is that background movement rate and see if there's changes in that. So even if we might not be able to say exactly which movements are driven by some unknown human-mediated action, we could talk about like how quick, or is it changing, essentially? Are we seeing more human-mediated movements than we would have expected? And then we need to think that through, well, what does that mean for the management? As mentioned before about declared areas, that these might be within a certain radius of a premises, or it could be statewide, or in a worst case, it could be national. So that might flow through to say, well, if we've got a lot of background movement that we don't know where this is coming from, it's not in the biological data, it's not in the movement tracking of livestock that we know of, that might indicate that we need to change an approach to management.
So it's out of the range of how far a mosquito flies becomes a question about whether or not it was naturally born or not.
Yeah, exactly. And then you have to sort of weigh up the probabilities as well. Was the wind really strong that day? And that's sort of data that we can go back to as well to then really try and assess the likelihood of that happening.
Mm-hmm. Do you find that a lot of your job is having to think laterally that way? I mean, I would never have thought to look at the wind, but clearly it's a really good thing you would need to do. So how do you know how to do that? How do you know to bring in those other factors?
Yeah, so one of the things that we do in the project that I work on, it's one of my favourite parts of the job. We go to jurisdictions, so to state governments, and we sit down with maybe 10 or 15 people from their biosecurity teams. It's an animal disease project, but we also often bring in sort of plant or marine specialists as well, to just try and get as many different perspectives on that as we can. And so then we put up decision-making scenarios and we put up modelling tools. I think we'll show a few of those in a few slides. And then through that, we get a really broad-ranging discussion and a lot of different issues come up. And that's, one of the ways that we can get a lot of different viewpoints from different approaches.
I mean, it seems like in a way, because you're the master of the intermediary tools, you also get to be the learner of all different environments, different types of problems. So your job is never boring in that sense. It's never the same.
Yeah, that's true. We sometimes I feel like we go there on the guise of we need to go there so that you can see our modelling and learn how to use it and that sort of thing. But it's as much as us going there to learn how they think about modelling or how they think about problem solving or decision making, so that we can do a better job in the future.
I mean, it also sounds like in the conversation we have these days about will AI displace our jobs, clearly AI can't really displace that job, because there's a human element about understanding the landscape that you have that AI isn't going to know completely.
And I think there's a lot of creativity when it comes to science and mathematics in general, that if you've got AI that's trained on what happened in the past, it's going to limit what creativity you could have in the future.
Ari, what lessons can intelligence analysts, interdisciplinary, learn from epidemiologists and vice versa in that crossover?
So I think intelligence analysis is a profoundly interdisciplinary profession. And it's not so much that your analyst is also your epidemiologist. It's that they're not trying to replicate what the epidemiologist is trying to do. They're trying to bring in the perspective of the epidemiologist, maybe their results or something like that, to inform a broader perspective to a supported decision maker. So maybe like with an example of COVID-19, you probably had analysts that needed to get up to speed very quickly on disease modeling and transmission rates and things like that, not to, again, replicate what the scientists are doing, but to inform the broader picture. And
Now, Chris, I wonder if you might share your slides with us and talk through this this particular example you've got from the Tour de France. There you go. And so maybe it's the mystery question: what is the relationship between Tour de France and thinking like a spy?
Yeah, so I'd have to thank Isabel Abel, a PhD student who works with me, for pointing this out. It was just a week or two ago, the Tour de France had to change course because of a lumpy skin disease management. And lumpy skin disease is one of the priority diseases that we're worried about introduction into Australia at the moment. And so this is what we spend a lot of time working with our government partners on. So if we can go to the next slide.
This is a cattle disease.
A cattle disease, that's absolutely right.
And it can be fatal?
I think it mostly reduces production and has really significant trade impacts, because most of the world, or all of the world that doesn't have lumpy skin disease, wants to stay that way. So this is our project, Enhancing Rapid Decision Support for Emergency Animal Disease Outbreaks, which we call HASTE for short. And do note, it says exercise only. This is not real. Please don't walk out of here saying we've got lumpy skin disease. So this is the type of scenario that we put up again in front of people. So we went up to Biosecurity Queensland and put a map like this in front of them and said, suppose you're 4 weeks into the outbreak and there's been movement restrictions. I mentioned before about this depopulation to try and manage what's happening. What would you say? I've got 200,000 culled animals, and people don't like that, and we need to potentially see a change in how we're managing this disease going forward. So today I want to put you in the seats of Biosecurity Queensland, and because I can't really see that well, Moira, could I ask you to be the decision maker here, and this is your support crew. All right. So can we go to the next slide? So we've got two options. We can focus on surveillance and put more effort into surveillance to understand what's happening and get on top of it faster and prevent future more spread. Or we can focus on vaccination, which will mean we can reduce spread directly, but we might know less about what's happening. And I think this is goes into a bit of the spirit of what we're talking today, is that we've got a bit of a trade-off between information and just doing something. So I think we might go by show of hands. Yeah. So hands up if we want to focus on vaccination to reduce transmission.
Oh, looks like half. Yeah.
Okay. So surveillance to have better knowledge.
And the other half.
Oh. And who doesn't want to make a decision? Nobody. Okay. So what do you think, Moira?
Though on balance, it was a vaccination one on this, but I wonder if you should be doing both.
Well, that's going to be one of the challenges, because we might need the same people. We might need the same vets to go out for both decisions, but perhaps we need to invest some extra resources to get some international vets in so we could do both. I haven't prepared that outcome, so I can... You got me. Okay, could we go to the next slide? So this is how the two play out. We've got a lot of stats on the right about what happens, and on the left we can slowly see the disease spreading. So in both cases it's really bad in this scenario, but there are differences. And when this finishes, if we can go to the next slide, you'll see that one of the key things is, we do have to spend a lot more time on vaccination. We've lost some of the text there, I've just noticed. All right. On the left we have vaccination, and on the right it's surveillance. And so in a way neither of them are better. You sort of have to pick your poison in this sense. Because on the left, if you vaccinate, we've got fewer infected premises, which is good, but of the ones that are infected, we know about less of them. But on the right, we have a better knowledge of what's going on. We've got fewer undetected premises, but we've got more infected overall. So this is the sort of thing that we often put up with our government colleagues, and put up different types of forecasts and analytics to really help people unpack what's going on and understand what sort of capabilities we can develop to help support them when they have to make this sort of really terrible decision.
Oh, that's great. That's fantastic. I mean, terrible decision, but a very good example to do. Before we open the floor to some questions, I thought I might also ask, apparently there is concern that not enough people are pursuing a career in intelligence and related fields. Do we think that perception is true, and why do you think that is? And I might start with you, Haley, and then...
Yes, we are under-resourced people-wise in both our intelligence and law enforcement agencies. Not just an Australian unique problem, it's around the world. With regards to the intelligence community, it's often vetting processes are taking too long, so 12 to 18 months on average to gain the right clearances. And by the time you get it, people have moved on to other things. And in a time where the population that's coming up to be working adults, include even myself, I'm not young anymore, but the instant gratification kind of lifestyle that we live, like it takes too long, but I've moved on to something else and I'm not ready to go back, or I've moved to a different state to start a role and I'm not going to move back to Canberra. People's lack of willingness to move to the capital of Australia as well is a pretty big problem. I mean, I'm serious though. People want flexibility. They want to stay where their family is. They want to stay near their favourite coffee shop. People are not flexible like they used to be. Like if you look at my parents' generation, they just did what they had to do and they moved where they were told, and there wasn't this whole like, I need flexibility and I need that. I'm not saying that's good or bad. It's just the reality of the change of generations. But also there's a lack of almost national service mentality that there used to be. Post 9/11, so many of us stepped up and said, I don't want to see this kind of thing in Australia, and I want to step up to defend, our way of life. And we've lost that. We have lost that. And so people just want to do what they want to do. And they also don't want to have to give up their phone, which you have to do to go inside these places. It was normal for us to not look at our phone, for 12 hours. Now it's like every 5 minutes, like everyone's got to check their phone. People don't know how to stand around without looking at their phone. You know, the awkwardness where you don't know what to do. I'll just look at my phone. You know, there's all these things around the changes in our community that really make it an unappealing place to want to work. And a general kind of population of people that are not very nice to people that work in law enforcement and intelligence. You know, walking into something like this, I never know if someone's going to be, you know, well, Hayley, you know, what about what happened here, and hold you personally accountable for things that the government decisions made at the time, or something that's really emotive, you know, where we as individuals had to make assessments based on information that we had that may not have had a pretty outcome on the front of the Australian, you know, but ultimately people don't want to have to be in that position. And same with our law enforcement colleagues, you know, people were spitting on them in the street. They're not respected like they used to be. And so we're making it an unappealing thing to want to do from that perspective.
Is there a solution to that?
If I had that solution, I'd be the Prime Minister, I think.
Excellent answer. Harry, you sounded like you might have some thoughts.
No,
on
I
this
can't
one.
add anything to what Hayley said there. Yeah.
You think that's pretty
that's fair.
right. All right, I think we're just on time to open the floor to some questions. And in fact, I think we've gotten some questions from online as well. And Joe, who I can't really see in the lights, but is there, okay, back there, might be able to read out the first question from online. And we encourage the folks who are coming in and listening to this online to jump in and send questions as well.
Yes, thank you, Suelette. We've got lots of people tuning in online tonight. The first question is from Emma. What's the biggest public misconception about intelligence work or strategic analysis?
Perhaps people don't quite understand the difference in the roles between an analyst and someone who's in operations. That might be the biggest misconception. But really, I think it would be good if we made it clear to people that the role of an analyst is for people who like problem solving and puzzle solving and working and are comfortable with dealing with uncertainty. So perhaps the biggest misconception is that analysis is kind of like it's a desk job for the most part, whereas operational stuff is your spy stuff.
I am interested in that, do many people who go into the decision-making end of the business, if I can call it that, come from the analyst end, often with expertise, for example, like Chris's or yours?
I don't know if we'd know. That might be kept under wraps, but maybe Hayley can speak to it.
Well, yeah, you have to start somewhere. So, yes.
Excellent. Okay. Do we have another maybe question we might take from the folks who sent it in, and then we'll put our hands up and pass the mic in the room?
We might go straight to in the room if that's okay, Suelette.
Yep. I can't quite see. We've got a couple. We've got someone down here and a couple of gentlemen over here on the side. Oh, there we go. Hello.
Hi, my name is Ahmed Misha. I'm from the Maldives. I used to work for, you still work for Maldives Police, and used to work for the counterterrorism department over there, and currently studying data science here in UNIMAB. I have several questions. I'm not sure, to the panel as a whole. First one is when you guys talked about biases, I have a question about what I call at my organization collection bias. When we know what we know and we don't know what we don't know, so we focus on what we know from our collection, and then what would a small country and a small organization learn from what Australians have done. And I think it also links up with what we have from the vaccination and surveillance thing, where surveillance probably might have actually found stuff, whereas in the vaccination you might not have found those things, right? Because there was less surveillance, things like that. And sorry. And one more thing about the communication of intelligence, where how do we go about communicating that with what are the lessons that were learned from Australia about how an analyst things, I understand like we can use things like word of estimate probability, but like how do you communicate that as well? Okay, this word means this time of probability, like this word is 70%, this word is 90%, and so on, right? And lastly, just there's a lot of conflicts happening here, like all over the world, and you can clearly see that a lot of flooding of social media content is happening from both sides of conflict, basically making social media content like impossible to use. How do you account for that?
Interesting. So I might actually hand to you, Ari, particularly on the issue of social media analysis and how do we account for what we don't know and can't see?
So I'll start with the second one. How do we account for what we don't know and we don't see? I think you need to integrate that into the confidence levels that you ascribe to your judgments. So there's a couple of nuances here. So you've got the probability of an event occurring, but then you've also got your confidence in that judgment. And there's slightly different things. Your confidence is about the quality of your information, the credibility of your sources, that kind of things. So you can have a really low probability event, but very high confidence. You can be very confident that something isn't going to happen, if you put it that way. So I think, yeah, the way that you deal with the unknown unknowns is incorporating that not just into your analysis, but into the confidence level that you ascribe to your judgments. The other question was about...
Oh, how in the sea of social media, some of which has descended into the garbage pool of social media, how do you actually extract, how can you extract value, meaning from it anymore compared to what you used to be able to do 5 or 6 years ago?
That I'm not totally sure about. It's a really difficult problem. I think what's motivating a lot of the shit, sorry to use a bad word, but that you see on social media is motivated reasoning. It's not so much whether a content is true or it's false. It's about people are motivated to share a particular point of view in order to get across some kind of point. So it's no longer about people sharing facts or information or stuff like that. It's about people using motivated reasoning to try to advance some sort of agenda. And I honestly, I don't know how to fix that.
And that has less value in an intelligence analyst sense?
I'd say so, yeah. Although I'm sure you could extract useful information if you knew a little bit about the motivations behind why someone might do that.
Do we have another question as well? I can't see where the roving mic has gone, so... Ah, yes, okay. The gentleman down on the side here.
Thanks for the talk. Will large language models ever get used in this space, or is it far too hard to put the data in? I mean, businesses are, they sort of protect their data, then they decide, oh yeah, we'll do a few checks and then we'll put them into the AI ecosystem and get their results. But I was wondering how that works in the intelligence space. Or is the confident wrong answer you get out not worth putting it in?
I think personally, I don't know this for sure, but I think these large language models are going to play a big part in intelligence analysis in the future. Not so much for chucking in data and getting them to spit out an answer, but for using it as sort of a sounding board or a way to conduct these structured analytic techniques. So for example, there's something that you should always do when conducting analysis, which is considering alternatives. And that requires a little bit of imagination and creativity, and that's something that LLMs are really good at. So if you have a particular hypothesis, you think this is the way something's going to play out, you might ask the LLM, all right, generate some alternative scenarios and assign them a likelihood. You can do that really quickly, and you can get some really good information out of that. I think the challenge will be to have it in a really secure environment. So whatever happens, the agencies themselves are probably going to need to develop their own LLMs. They won't be able to use any of the off-the-shelf stuff.
Which is actually a question for you, Haley, but do you worry about sovereignty in that setting? Do you worry that a government, not mentioning any by name, might shortcut or financially shortcut things and just buy it off the shelf, use somewhere else, share it, punch it into ChatGPT?
I think this goes back to one of the questions you asked me earlier, where we talk about our people being our greatest risk. I'm not actually concerned about government shortcutting and buying in those kinds of things. I'm concerned about employees and workers putting information into those systems, which we already know is happening. And it doesn't have to be inside the intelligence community. Some of the biggest damage is corporate espionage. So this is business intelligence that is being stolen because people are putting information into the LLMs to get a response. So it might be even codes. Hey, I'm working on this thing. Write me a code. Here's the code I've done so far. Write me a new code. The code may not work that it provides back, but the information you've put in there is a rich environment for people to extract corporate intelligence, personal information. So we're looking at the whole ecosystem from all the way from your petty criminal hacker to organised transnational crime groups to terror groups to foreign governments looking to coerce, even people putting in personal information that can make them susceptible to blackmail. You know, we have to look at it from thinking like a spy. What can I do with this information? And I always tell people who are looking to create new apps or new software, think about how it can be misused and build it around that before you think about it in the context of how it will be used. So here's the intent of what I want the app to do, but how can it be misused? Because it's always after the fact that it's really difficult for us to overcome the issue that it's created, whether it be in child safety. So we think of some of the apps and games that children play that are now rich hunting grounds for people that are, you know, conducting child sex abuse, recruitment and grooming in those spaces. You know, individuals who, if we think of the Robin Sage incident on LinkedIn, you know, where it was a controlled experiment and they were able, an individual was able to recruit essentially hundreds of people with clearances and extract information from them on LinkedIn through kind of that model where, oh, they're already connected to this person and this person, they must be legitimate. And then they were able to kind of use that to extract information, get invites places, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a whole lot of dags that hang off this. And I just would love to see people thinking about, well, as an employee, this actually puts my job at risk. So we need to actually explain to people, they might not care about the company losing millions of dollars, but they need to think about what implication that has on them personally. And I think that that's something we need to communicate better because people are very much about, well, how does it affect me?
I read somewhere that one of the Gen AI services had done a release, and if you said, you know, hey, whatever it wasn't ChatGPT, but write this code for me, for a period of time, a short period of time, people would get a response from it saying, you should learn to program on your own. If I give you this, you won't learn how to program properly. Go do it yourself.
Well, that's another issue to do with the LLMs, right? You've got, you see these things now that say, oh, you know, I got through university without ChatGPT. That makes me like better than you. And I think about the fact that we're raising a whole generation of people that they get inside the intelligence service where you don't have access to these tools and they won't be able to write. And they won't be able to communicate critical decisions to decision makers because they have no idea how to put the bottom line up front or succinctly communicate an issue or, you know, digest themselves. We used to be the chat GPTs. We would digest vast volumes of data and information and quickly analyse it and then shoot out a response to our management and leadership. We're raising a generation of people that will not be able to do that.
Good point. Okay, where is that roving mic? Yes, here.
Hello, thanks. I really enjoyed the chat. I was just wondering if somebody wanted to get into the intelligence space, what sort of pathways are there? What sort of skills maybe are you looking for if you're looking at recruitment, or if there are any I guess I don't want to say preferential degrees, but you know what I mean, sort of credentials or that sort of thing that you'd be looking for.
Go ahead.
Well, back in the day, there didn't used to be degrees in counterterrorism and intelligence, and I see every second person kind of that comes to events that I go to doing those now. Those are not a requirement. In fact, a real varied kind of pool is what's preferred. So when I went through, there were people that had been nurses, emergency room managers, teachers, ex-military. We had a sniper, trying to think what other kind of things. But it doesn't matter, just any degree is fine that allows you to, like I said, be able to gather vast amounts of information, think critically. Because ultimately, I've been on the ground with some of the smartest people. They're so smart. And I just think, oh my gosh, I wish I could think like them. But then when the rubber hits the road, they can't, right? They can't think on the spot. They can't respond under pressure. They can't make decisions without complete data. So all of those things matter. Critical thinking, emotional intelligence, your ability to interact. Because even if you're not in an operational role, you still have to be able to communicate clearly with people that makes them able to make a decision. Because it's very hard for leadership to make a decision when they're not part of the investigative process. So they're relying on you to really come up with a succinct, clear and, definitive, this is my assessment and this is my recommendation. So I would say any degree and just keep applying, I think.
Although a science degree at Melbourne is also very advantageous. Yes, we have another set of questions, hands. I think we have a gentleman just in the back there, or halfway down the aisle on the left, yeah.
Hi. So we talk about collecting data and making decisions from that. But then my question is, to what extent do you think intuition is a valuable skill or tool given limited data or when there's too much data to actually look at properly?
Question for you.
Well, what is intuition? I think Gary Klein talks about how intuition is actually developed from experience. So I think intuition will play a massive role in the way that you analyze data, but that comes from analyzing data a lot. It's not something that you're born with. I think that's a mistake that people make when talking about intuition. It's something that comes from deep experience that you build, I guess, those pathways in your brain where it feels like it's just automatic. But actually, it's because you've done this hundreds and hundreds of times that you have maybe subconsciously picked up on little things that make a difference.
Chris, did you have any thoughts on that particularly?
Yeah, I was just reflecting on the time that we work with state government and the chief veterinary officer teams about the way that they make decisions, because they do need to make decisions under quite extremely short timeframes, the sort of timeframes that we're talking, I guess, days, hours even. So when a new disease gets notified, you would expect it's called the Consultative Committee for Emergency Animal Disease Outbreaks would form the next day, and they would need to make a policy recommendation, and they would need to implement their response plan in the next day or 2 days and get that approved. And they will always they won't have all the information that they want at that time. So I find a lot of these people who get into these roles are really quite comfortable in making decisions with limited data. And then where we can come in is really trying to supplement that with information as we go, so we can sort of uplift the data to the information they need faster than we could otherwise.
I think it sounds like confidence is an important element in decision making in this. Do you find that as a factor, Haley?
Look, I don't know if it's confidence, but I kind of want to make this more interesting and argue with Ari on this point that we're not born with intuition. I think women are, but no. I would actually recommend, and I make no profit out of this, there is a book called The Gift of Fear by Gavin de Becker, and it talks about our intuition, and it actually, I joke, it does talk about what you speak about there, Ari, around how we make these micro decisions essentially that we're not even conscious that we're making all the time. And I am serious when I say women are better at it because we've had to make more of them as we grow because of the threat environment we live in that is different to the male environment growing up. So you will find by the time a woman is 18, they've already made all these decisions about their safety and security. And that means that when we walk into roles in the security sector and intelligence, we're actually developed our intuition around safety and security and intelligence issues at a greater rate. Is there someone behind the bush when I get off the bus? Was that man's compliment, going to put me at risk? Is that, and that's why some roles, like a nurse, for example, will be really good going into intuitive intelligence making decisions because whether they've been in an emergency room and they've dealt with an individual who's mentally ill and has propensity for violence, they're making micro judgments all the time. Like, where's something that they can use to hurt me or somebody else? Where's the closest access? Where could they run? What's their size? Can I take them on? All these decisions we don't know we're making in the background. So I kind of feel like once women, become women, adults, we are far more intuitive. And I'm not trying to start a gender debate. I genuinely believe that through our environments and the way we've grown, we actually develop in a different way.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Do we have yes, if we could come over to this side. I've been paying only attention to this side, I apologise.
Hi, so I was wondering, you were talking about the vetting. How is the privacy concerns of like the amount of data that you have to give and information about yourself for vetting? How's that affecting how many people who are actually getting it so that they can get into roles that deal with critical data?
Good question.
I'm not entirely sure how to answer this to satisfy the question, but I think you have to trust at some point the system that you're wanting to work within. So if you don't trust it, you don't belong in it, quite frankly. You need to trust that we go through pretty significant vetting processes and we have to be politically agnostic, etc. And so you will find anyone that comes from this space who's been through that vetting process as well as, fit for job role, that they hold a high level of integrity. And so the people within these places are not going to be doing the wrong thing. And quite frankly, they don't have the time to do the wrong thing with that data. And they're obviously protecting that data to the best they can because it's a national security, thing to have that information leaked. So you'd have to ask people that have chosen not to pursue a clearance based on the amount of information you have to provide. I do know a lot of people that throw in the towel because they can't be bothered because it is a lot of information. I mean, I've had 22 addresses in 20 years and you have to provide evidence of every one of those addresses. And at one point I thought, I can't be bothered doing this. I did finish it again, but, I think that at some point we have to understand the balance between privacy and protection. And if you don't trust the institutions that you're wanting to work within, then there's a bit of a problem.
So we have, I think, a wrap up if we can. Oh, no, we have a question there.
I've got a quick question. So you talked about reasons why people might not want to be part of the intelligence services. What are the benefits? What's the reward? Why do you keep coming back?
I feel like I have a monopoly on this microphone. Apologies, everybody. Look, for me, it's a national service thing, and moving back to Australia, I've got 3 children. I want them to be able to grow up in the country I grew up in, not one that's ravaged by war or challenges or, limitation of resources, no matter what that resource is. So the camaraderie, I think, you build bonds like none other within the services that you choose to serve in. And don't you all want to keep being able to ask the questions we're asking without fear? And the only way we can do that is protecting the country that we live in. And I think I was saying to a friend earlier, my biggest concern is we're actually being torn apart by a lack of cohesion and a lack of we are one country. And certainly we can think different things, and that's the beauty of Australia. But we're actually so torn up now that I'm not sure that we could stand up a defence in the way we need to in the coming years. So how do we recalibrate our nation to want to serve in these places, to want to protect the freedom we have today? I have lots of thoughts on this and I am very concerned about it. Talking about social media and reels, I love a good reel, okay? So, and all my friends know I do because I'm that person that sends a lot of reels. But there was one recently where an individual went around and he asked all these different types of people in the street, if Australia was attacked, would you put on a uniform to defend it? And it was fascinating. 5 out of the 6 people they asked said no, or had a question like, well, it would depend who was invading us. And I'm thinking, do you understand? It doesn't matter who's invading. It's not going to be positive. It's not going to be. You're going to lose your internet probably first of all. That's the first thing to go. Is
Can
your
you
internet.
say that with 90% confidence?
Right. I'm pretty sure that our power and our internet will be cut first. So if that's one reason to serve in the intelligence community, there's your reason right there. But no, I think it comes down to your national service, and it is an amazing place to work, and there's nothing like it. Yeah.
Ari, do you feel that is part of motivating factor for you in the work that you do as well? Do you think that,
No.
Okay,
No,
that's interesting.
I completely agree with with what Hayley's just said. I think that is the important part of intelligence analysis, and what makes it what would make it a very rewarding career. For me, my interest in this stuff is academic and philosophical. It's not so much about protecting Australia, although the hope is that whatever we discover in this research will have that effect of protecting Australia and its values.
Mm-hmm. Chris?
Yeah, listening to that, reflecting that I feel the type of work we do comes at this from quite a different angle. In the sort of the lumpy skin disease outbreak simulation that we put up, it's quite a terrible situation, but we try to bring it to a place of almost like enjoyment in a way. So even though we're dealing with really serious topics, we're trying to bring it into, it's almost a game really. Sometimes we talk about it, that we're going to develop a game such that people can, play lumpy skin disease and, and and those people being like the key decision makers. So it does bring sort of an element of kind of enjoyment to something that in reality, if we have to do this, it's going to be really, really difficult.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's very good advice. I think we might wrap it up now, but thank you so much to our wonderful panelists. Can we please give them a round of applause? Yeah. And please stay for refreshments. Come up and mob them afterwards. Feel free to ask them all sorts of questions that they won't be able to answer. And also enjoy the exhibition here at the Science Gallery. Thank you very much.